Hello, I'm Francis Seeley from GlobalNet 21 and Enfield Voices. I'd like to welcome you to this webinar interview today. And this is one of the special ones we do where I'm, for most of the time, going to be a fly on the wall. I'm going to disappear. I won't be involved. It's one of those webinars where we've got some young people, some from Enfield Youth Parliament, and all of them in the Enfield Climate Action Forum youth group, which we just formed. And they're going to interview an MP. They've already done it. They've interviewed Kate Osamor, which went very well. And you'll see in a minute, we've got Feryal Clark, who is the MP for Enfield North, and they're going to interview her. I'm going to start with one question and then I'm going to vanish. So my first question, Feryal, and I'll ask this to everyone because I think it's interesting for everyone. What was the moment when you realized, or can you remember if it was a moment, what was the moment when you realized that climate change was such a serious problem that you felt that something had to be done about it in whatever career you chose? And obviously you're an MP now.
I think for me, the point when I started looking at it seriously was when I would say the point that got me to look at my behaviour and also think about the environment and climate in a different way was when I first became a councillor. So I was a very young councillor, and I had finished university, came back and moved back home. My parents were quite proud, and they helped me buy a car. And I, being a tiny, short person, of course, I went for a really large car, bought myself a BMW 7 Series. It was a second-hand car, but and 7 Series, and I used to. It was a saloon. It was humongous. And after work, after my meetings at the council, I would always offer my colleagues a lift, or if you were going somewhere, I would offer them a lift. And they would decline it, but in a really they would it was almost like it was a shameful thing. They would always say no thanks, we're fine. And it took me a while to realize that it was in our political group at that point. It had become almost a social pariah to drive short distances. I'd never looked at it in that way. I'd never looked at it that way until numerous people week in, week out constantly rejected my offer of lifts. And then someone, one of my colleagues actually raised the issue with me, said, do you realize, it's actually, you don't live that far, you couldn't even walk it. And do you realize the impact that you're having, the pollution? And that got me thinking. And that was the point where I stopped using my car. I stopped using the car because I only used it. So I traveled to my day job, I used to work in a hospital. I was a biomedical scientist. So I used to travel to my day job on the bus, on the tube, sustainable. But when I came back, I would come back home and then jump in my car to go to my council duties. So it got me, so that intervention from my colleagues got me to think about my behaviour and my action. And that was the point where I started taking a better, a more in-depth look at how our individual actions and behaviour actually contributes slowly to to whatever it is, pollution, to the climate emergency. And we didn't actually call it climate emergency. I would say one other thing that I thought was really stark for me, Francis, I'll end with this, were the fires in Australia. I still have images. That just strengthened my belief around the fact that we needed to do more. The fires in Australia.
Okay, well, let's go to the students now, because I want to make sure they have a fair amount of time. And Navia's going to start this off, and then I'm going to disappear and come back at the end, okay? So, Navia, over to you.
Hi, thank you, Francis. Hi again, Feryal. It's nice to see you. So our first question is, do you support the incinerator, and if so, why?
So in my previous role, before I became an MP, I was I was a lead member in a borough where I looked after, I was responsible for environment, and one of those things was recycling and waste. So as part of that, we were part of the 7 boroughs that make up this organisation called North London Waste Authority, the organisation that is behind the incinerator project. And this project it's not a new idea. So the 7 boroughs produce, hundreds and thousands of tons of waste and recycling each year. And they've been looking at, so they have this facility, which is in Edmonton at the moment, and it's coming to end of its life because it's breaking down, it's not as efficient, so it needs a solution. So what all the boroughs did was they looked at options. So this is like mid 2000s, 2000s to late 2000s, and I got involved in it. I started looking at it in 2010. And at that point, they had come up, they spent millions of pounds trying to find, the most environmentally friendly way of getting rid of our waste, because all boroughs have a legal responsibility. The boroughs, like the councils, have to deal with their waste. So they were looking at ways of how they can increase their recycling, reduce the waste, and what do they do with the waste? So they looked at lots of different options, and they had come up with many proposals which they spent, I think, like millions of pounds on. And then they were going, so I think it included at that point a biological treatment of the waste and so on. And it got to a point where they were not able, so the crash happened, and austerity started. The government cut the funding that was supposed to, I think they were called credits at the point, that boroughs were supposed to get to invest in these new facilities and these new projects. Basically, then the boroughs, the 7 boroughs, which Enfield is one, had to look at different ways of actually dealing with their waste. What were the other options? They spent, sorry, it's another vote, they spent years and they spent millions of pounds, again, looking at how do they get rid of their waste most environmentally friendly. And the options at the moment that they came out with, that, because you'll pay for it. You'll pay per ton, per kilo of waste that the council, so if the council collects it, when it takes it to the incinerator, it has to pay for every kilo of waste it puts through. So boroughs pay for it, so they wanted a cheap and environmentally friendly way of dealing with the waste. But at the moment, the only options that are remaining for the boroughs, for the North London Waste Authority, is to landfill.
Yep.
There is no landfill capacity in this country, which means what we have to do is to drive it and then ship it to another country, another poor country, to landfill it.
So sorry, I just have to interrupt you just due to time restraints. Can I just get a concise answer? So is what you're saying you do support the incinerator, like a yes or a no, or is it?
I wish it was that simple. If there was another option available, I will support another option. I've gone through it. There is no other option. It's the most environmentally friendly and the cheapest way for residents to get rid of their waste.
So you support the incinerator. So okay, thank you.
I'm not. So the thing is, I don't, because as a MP, because it's a local authority. 2 things. It's not in my constituency, but my residents have use of it. And the second thing is, if they can, I don't have a decision over it, and the decision has already been made. It's not a case of whether I support it or not. It's not. I mean, I have no choice. I have no influence. I have no voice and power on that.
I know it's not in your constituency, but it affects the people that are in your borough. So wouldn't you have a say in what happens with the incinerator? Just quickly.
I wouldn't. So we have to look at. So they have to look at what the points of influence are. So the incinerator decision was taken years ago.
Yeah.
The government, central government, gave it consent, and the authority, the North London Waste Authority, it's made up of 7 boroughs. They made the decision. So if I was going to, if I, you know, for me, it would be on what basis am I objecting to it? On air pollution. Well, the air pollution in my area, which affects my constituents the most, is the pollution from the car-dominated streets. It is the M25, it's the A406, it's the roads that are full, chock-full of cars. So I have to look at what actually affects my constituents. But as I said, if on that incinerator, it is in the borough. If someone was to come and say, you know, we have, you know, this is the opportunity. These are the different options. Which one would you like? We've got the incinerator or a better opportunity. Of course, I would say, you know, I think you should go for that. But there isn't that, I'm afraid.
So, Venetia, just moving on quickly.
Yeah, so what do you think is the benefit of having an incinerator then?
I think when you look at, so you have to, so there is no aware, so this facility that you've got on a doorstep is where the waste has been, that's where the waste gets disposed of. I think the benefits are, it's more environmentally friendly way. Instead of landfilling it, you are incinerating it and generating energy, which will then heat thousands of homes in Edmonton. And it's cheaper for the constituents, for the residents of Enfield and the 6 other boroughs. And it also means that they will create other facilities that, and then it pushes, because there's also, they're building lots of other facilities to increase and encourage more recycling in those boroughs. But I would say it's the option is the environment is the best environmental way to dispose of the waste and the cheapest way for the residents of the boroughs.
So Feryal, do you think overall the advantages of the incinerator outweigh the disadvantages?
I think so. I've gone through. So as you can imagine, so you guys are asking me. So I've been asked about it quite a lot, and I can say these decisions aren't taken lightly. They spent millions of pounds on experts who look at what is the greenest way to get something, what is the cheapest way to do something. We are generating, you know, whether we like it or not, we each generate, you know, like tons of like waste and recycling. Something has to be done with it. So I think what's offered there, from what I have read, from the questions I have asked North London Waste Authority and the answers I've got, there are benefits, whether it's jobs in Enfield, whether it's, as I said, whether it's the energy that's generated, whether it's avoiding, you know, diverting waste from landfill. It seems to me, based on the evidence that I've been presented, is the best option. And there are the benefits. Those are the benefits.
Yeah.
Are you aware of the agreements made globally, and are you aware of how the incinerator directly violates those?
There are many issues with the way that this impacts the community and the areas. But if nothing is done, the impact on the environment and the agreements is worse. So it is. So and from as I said, from the evidence that I have been presented by NLWA, their facility is the cleanest and it's the most environmental. It's the best way to divert carbon. But ultimately, the agreements, the deals, are all about reducing our carbon footprint, and the option that has been presented is the best way to reducing the carbon dioxide every year, and as a greenhouse emission. So that's what. So it does. When you look at on balance, it is the most it's the best way when you still have to, because they will still have this waste to deal with, and this is the best way of doing it and reducing their CO2 emissions.
Okay.
So do you agree that the placement of the incinerator is in direct correlation with the high levels of ethnic minorities that live in the areas that it will directly affect?
I don't think so, because you know the facility has been in that place in that area before it was built there 65 years ago, and it's in a industrial road. And if you were to look at the emissions, the impact of the incinerator and the traffic in that area, the traffic has, I would say, the emissions from traffic 846 are a lot higher. So in response to your question, no, I don't think so, because the incinerator has been there for many, many, many years, and it's designated land for it. And you will have to find another place to put it if you were to remove it from there. So it wasn't selected because that's quite diverse. It was selected 65 years ago because it's an industrial estate.
So, like you said, it was selected to be put there 65 years ago. 65 years ago, there obviously were ethnic minorities in the area. However, the problem we're having they wouldn't put something as big as this, they wouldn't put an incinerator such like this in an area such as, I don't know, with a high Caucasian population. They wouldn't put it in somewhere such as Cockfosters, they wouldn't put it somewhere such as High Barnet. And that's the problem we're having, because the areas that it affects have a high amount of ethnic minorities. I don't like the term BIN, so I'm going to refer to them as ethnic minorities. And that's the problem we're having. So for you to say that it doesn't affect you don't think, and obviously that's your opinion, it doesn't affect ethnic minorities, but it's quite coincidental that they're putting something that will affect us, not you in 30 years, it will affect us young people in 30 years. And that's the problem that we're having.
But Navia, but it's not like it hasn't been selected to people, it's there already. It's there. So if you look at the impact, what is affecting the communities around the area, if we're looking at the impact, we need to look at the actual impact. If we want to actually reduce the impact on the community, I would say let's look at the impact of pollution from the cars in that area on the health of the residents in that area. Let's look at the road accidents in that area. The incinerator hasn't been selected to be put in that area because of the demographics. It was there. It is, you have designated space there. You're right. If you had to go and pick a new place, if it was for newly selected and they had said, let's put in Edmonton now, I would say, I would question why it was being selected. But it is an existing facility, an existing space that's been, dedicated to this sort of facility, and is surrounded by industrial estate, and is surrounded by one of the busiest roads in the area, the A406.
Yeah. So Feryal, previously you suggested that this was the optimistic alternative. So have you actually considered any other suitable alternatives instead of the incinerator?
So I would again, whilst I'm really happy, and I am genuinely, and I think it's fantastic that you guys have an interest in it, and I'm happy to answer your questions on it as well. I do have to say, I don't have any influence on it at the moment, but from what I have written, and I do, because my residents are interested in it. And I have had constituents, whether it's young constituents or whether people interested in environment, and they have written to me, and I have raised their concerns with North London Waste Authority. And North London Waste Authority have explored all the available options. As I said, they have spent millions, as Francis will know, on experts to come up with what options there are available to them. And they have selected what they're going with as the greenest and the cheapest the option that is available to them. So as far as I've been told, yes, they have looked at all the options.
Thank you.
So the incinerator already breaches legal limits of air pollution and does not meet the agreements of the Paris Agreement. So why is the incinerator planned to be expanded if it won't meet the Paris Agreement?
So again, I would say from the representations I have made to the to NLWA, they are saying so the emissions from it, so the technologies they're going to be utilising in the new facility will be the state-of-the-art facility, state-of-the-art technologies. So the emissions from it will be really low, will be a lot lower than they are at the moment. In terms of the CO2 emissions, it's predicted that it will be a lot lower than what the alternatives there are for it. So the option for them to do is to landfill their waste. So they have to make a decision. They're making a decision based on which is the way. So we have to deal. They're saying we have to deal with the waste. Which is the least carbon extensive way of getting rid of waste, and this is the least carbon intensive way of getting rid of the waste. So the alternative will be even worse for them, they're saying.
Okay,
Final
thank you.
question. I've noticed that you said a lot about traffic pollution and cars and stuff like that. However, the ULEZ and fossil fuel bans can quickly cut emissions, but the incinerator will still be effective in 30 years, as it will be something that I'm sure is a long-term option for waste. And in light of this, the death of 9-year-old Ella Chrissy Deborah was from asthma triggered by air pollution in London. So how could you still support this Edmonton incinerator expansion, bearing in mind in the name it says Edmonton, which is a high ethnic minority area, which will import waste from far afield to choke our kids for generations?
So the ULEZ only expands to North and South Circle at the moment, and needs to continue to expand further to ensure it covers the whole of London, in my opinion. The impact of traffic is happening, or it's having an impact on the growth of the lungs of our children, and as you said, the people who live nearest to most congested roads. The best way so it's not just either and or. We do need to continue to reduce our car use. We do need to continue to reduce the emissions from roads. And the government is, whilst we're seeing some of the interventions in London, the government has recently announced billions of pounds for road building schemes. So they are continuing to build roads. So even though there are lots of interventions to reduce emissions from cars, there are also plans to massively increase road building, to increase capacity, increase cars on our streets. So that is a concern to me. So yes, I want to reduce that. But with the incinerator, the best thing we can do, the best way to make this redundant and not usable is to continue to increase our recycling rate. Because the more we divert away from the incinerator, the more we recycle, the less there will be to go through the incinerator. So I think, and Enfield spends a lot of money, but we just, we're still nowhere near what some of the other European countries are in terms of recycling rates. And most boroughs are still, we're still in our 30s, 40s. They're still, London boroughs are 20s, mid-20s. I'm talking about percentage of their waste they're recycling. So the best way to make sure that the incinerator, at some point in the future, becomes redundant, is to make sure we don't need it, that we are recycling. But the government has removed the incentives, the regulations that boroughs, the powers that boroughs had to ensure that people are recycled. So you don't have to, councils can't force people to recycle anymore. So I think so if you want to deal with that, we do need to tackle the causes of it as well.
So in terms of you not being like able to get your constituents to recycle and such, like, have you looked into campaigning about such things and bringing about awareness how councils, Enfield Council, for example, should be allowed to make people have to recycle? So like you said, things like the incinerator can become redundant. So us in 30 years, we're not choking on thick air.
Absolutely. So I mean, as I said, you know, I hope the council continues to do more, and I will push the council as because I'm one of the 3 MPs in the area, as you know. I will continue to push the council to do a lot more on recycling. But before, when in my previous role, we did tons of things to encourage residents. So, you know, you give free recycling bags, you do lots of campaigns to encourage people, whether it's, you know, you try to get people to change their purchasing habits around, you know, so that they've reduced the amounts of food waste they're generating. There are there's the millions of pounds each year are spent on campaigns in trying to get people to recycle. But I also, when in my previous role, and I have raised it now in my current role as an MP with ministers, around the lack of regulation. The government took away the powers for local authorities to enforce recycling. They was done in 2013. When you look at the neighbouring countries, in Wales, in Scotland, they recycle so much more than we do in UK, and they both have regulations and powers to ensure that it's compulsory. People have to recycle, and we don't take it seriously as Wales and as serious as Scotland. I wish there was, so residents have the facilities. So you've got your wheelie bins for your waste and your recycling. The council has changed to alternative weekly collections. So they encourage you there's lots of research done around this. So if you reduce how frequently you pick up the residual waste that goes into the incinerator, people are more likely to separate their waste and separate it into food and dry recycling and garden. So there's lots of these schemes to try to encourage people, but people are still throwing so much of their waste into the residual bins. And we need to do something about that.
Okay. Well, that's...
One thing I was going to say, I'm not sure if this is still the case. I mean, in the new facility, they will also have an opportunity. So what they want to do is, when they take the waste, it's to separate to be able to recover some of the recycling from your black bins, so it's not all going into the incinerator. So they're also going to try to do that in this facility as well. But surely, I mean, the most important thing is that we as residents should be dealing with our recycling.
Thank you. Those are all the questions from us, but thank you very much. Thank you.
No, thank you. I'm delighted. Genuinely, I think it's great that there is so much activism around in Enfield. I know that it is young people that pushed and raised the agenda over the past couple of years. And you're right, Naveer, it will be your generation who will continue to deliver, to work on this campaign, to work, to even do jobs that will be involved in this. So yeah, well done. Thank you very much for interviewing me, for giving me this opportunity.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. That you can tell, can't you, Feryal? They are a lot tougher interviewers than I am. So, so you've got a lot of direct questions, and thank you for coming and doing it, and thank you for the 3 of you for doing it. As I said, Naveer's done it before, and Anisha and Kim, you did fantastically well, and you weren't thrown at all. I didn't know all the questions would be on the incinerator, but they were, so that shows you how passionate people are about the incinerator and about pollution. And clearly this issue is going to go on and on. Some recent research has shown that incineration in general will probably mean that Boris Johnson won't reach his climate change net zero targets. We've no idea where.
I think there are many other reasons why we know that he's not going to reach his target, but that may be, yeah. So there are lots of reasons.
I'm sure there are, but that was certainly one of them. And what we don't know is whether the Edmonton incinerator will allow Enfield to reach its targets either, because that wasn't in the climate action plan. So this will go on, and we know there's a court case coming up to see whether, in fact, incineration breaches the 2015 Paris Agreement. So, you know, the story's not over yet. So I'm sure we'll be doing interviews on this again. So it's been really interesting, and thank you all for doing it. And I think it will make a lot of people think, and it may make people understand your position, Feryal. And I think all of you, sure, I know, are passionate about it too. So thanks, all of you. And we'll end this interview.
Can I just say a few words as well, Francis, very quickly. You know, as I said right at the beginning, whilst it's not, you know, it's not in my constituency. It's, you know, I'm not a member of the council, so there's nothing easier for an MP to turn around and just condemn it because it's so much easier to do that. But we do have to look at what the evidence is, and I look forward to what the court case brings up and what some of the reviews put forward. But it's not, you know, I don't think it's the right thing to do as a politician to always run for the easy thing and go, yeah, absolutely, I'll join you and campaign against it, because I know for a fact there are, from my residents, the pollution from cars, I see it every day, I breathe it in every day. It's worse from those cars than it is then from the incinerator there. And bring another option. I think absolutely we would all push for it, and we will all support it.
Okay, well, you know, again, thank you for doing that. And I think, you know, looking at other options, we will in the future, recycling as well, because Enfield wants to get to 75%, which is an incredibly ambitious target, without explaining how they're going to do it. And so we'll be debating and talking about that as well. And, you know, I think it's great that we have sixth formers asking you questions, because I think they ask you the questions that matter to them. And those are the questions that are going to matter in the next 10, 20, 30 years time. So I'm really pleased we've done it, and we're going to do it again and again, because their questions are far more important than people of my age in a way. So I'm really pleased that everyone's done it. So, okay, thank you. And we'll end this interview now.